The Cumming Global Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we've recorded this podcast series, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and we pay our respects to all elders past, present and emerging. Off Script is brought to you by the Cumming Global Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics, part of the Peter Doherty Institute for Infection and Immunity. I'm Dr. Matt Agnew, your host. Australia has long punched above its weight in medical research. We created the cervical cancer vaccine, the bionic ear, and we were the first to grow SARS-CoV-2, the virus that caused COVID-19, outside of China and the first to share it with the world, right here at the Doherty Institute. We could be on the brink of our next big medical breakthrough, pandemic therapeutics. The timing couldn't be more urgent, especially with reports suggesting the next pandemic might be just around the corner. While much of this groundbreaking research is happening right here in Victoria, the big picture for Australia's health and medical research strategy is shaped up in Canberra. And a man who knows that strategy well is the Honourable Mark Butler, Minister for Health and Ageing and Minister for Disability and the NDIS. Unfortunately, Minister Butler and I couldn't line up our schedules for a chat, so he sat down with the Director of the Cumming Global Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics, Professor Sharon Lewin.
Minister, thanks so much for joining us on this podcast. Australia's medical research capability is world-class, and we're continuing to strengthen the pipeline from discovery and innovation through to commercialisation. And that, of course, includes research aimed at helping us respond better to the next pandemic. Is the threat of the next pandemic often on your mind?
It is. The mind of any health minister in any jurisdiction across the world is a cluttered one with lots of things occupying it. But I think there's every good reason for any health minister to be thinking about the next pandemic. As you know, Sharon, we received the report of our COVID inquiry, the independent COVID inquiry, not too long ago still, and a lot of those conclusions and recommendations from that inquiry really stuck in my mind. And we still come across them, not only in terms of health system capacity and making sure that that is better equipped to deal with the next one, but also the impact that it had on our community and rebuilding trust in our community. So that the recommendation or the conclusion that that inquiry delivered to us, which would be that if the next pandemic came along next week, we would have difficulty, frankly, getting the community to cooperate with the sorts of decisions that government's made to shut down schools, to impose density requirements, to shut up borders and the like. That particularly plays on the minds of all political leaders, I think, the impact on community trust. But as Health Minister, I guess I'm particularly focused on making sure that the health system is better equipped, frankly, than it was at the beginning of 2020 to deal with the next one, because, the advice again from the inquiry and the advice of experts like you has always been it's likely the next one will be in our lifetimes.
As you just mentioned, most of the world focused on preventing transmission through lockdowns, masks and social distancing. But as a review you commissioned into COVID-19 found, there was actually a delay in access to antiviral therapeutic drugs or treatments. So what are the challenges in procuring new drugs in a pandemic and ensuring the community can access them?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think we found, the Australian community found in a very stark way the sense of vulnerability an island continent has at the end of the world to supply shocks on supply lines. We require those supply lines to remain open for so many important elements of our society. So PPE, vaccines, antivirals, all of them were highly vulnerable to those supply lines. And I think, there's a level of determination to make sure that doesn't happen again. As you know, Sharon, a lot of that focus has been on vaccine sovereign capability. So the development of the facility in Melbourne of Moderna to ensure that we have end-to-end mRNA vaccine manufacturing capability was a decision of the former government that we supported at the time, and seeing that pretty close to being up and running, I think is a really important milestone for pandemic preparedness for the next time, but also just in terms of sovereign capability for respiratory vaccine manufacturing here generally, I think is a really good thing. The cell-based manufacturing facility that CSL Seqirus is building in Melbourne as well, I think situates us very well. But I think the exposure to supply line vulnerability around antivirals is something that the COVID inquiry report did point to. I know you're thinking about that a lot as well. And I think that's probably not as advanced as we are in terms of rebuilding sovereign capability in the area of vaccines.
You're just building on your comments on vaccines and the new capability we now have, of course, in Australia with mRNA, with Moderna and CSL, as you mentioned. What role do you think Australia plays in providing vaccines for the Asia-Pacific region?
Well, that was an important part of the pandemic response over the last several years. We pay a great deal of attention to our region first and foremost, but providing vaccines into the rest of the globe more broadly is something that I know Australia tried to do through the course of the last pandemic as well. The mRNA facility at Moderna will have a capacity of about 100 million doses a year. We think that combined with the facility at Seqirus means that we should have more than enough capability to deal with our own needs, but also to be able to supply into the region as well. So we have, and I know the former government did keep an eye on thinking about our capability to help others. Some of the countries in our own region, including the Pacific Islands, really obviously never going to have their own sovereign capability themselves. They are going to require good levels of support from countries like Australia. Frankly, the pandemic agreement that the WHO agreed in May as well was obviously an important way to give confidence to the entire community, including developing nations, that next time that some of the concerns that they very justifiably had about their access to vaccines after being so forthcoming in the provision of some of the data that you would have been seeing, Sharon, and others at the Doherty would have been seeing. I know, having attended the World Health Assembly last year during some of the difficult periods of negotiations around that pandemic agreement, that one of the key objectives of landing that agreement was to have a much greater level of confidence around equity across the world, because we know that no one is safe until everyone is safe in this area, leaving aside the general equity imperatives to make sure that vaccine supply is shared across the world.
Yeah, super important issues to work through now, of course. And as you say, the pandemic agreement certainly is encouraging in getting us partway there. We're hearing a lot about the pressure on our hospitals in Australia right now, and your government's investing in urgent care clinics, boosted aged care support and expanding telehealth to help ease the load. But when the next pandemic hits, how do we manage an already overstretched hospital system?
That really was one of the big hits to our healthcare system, was the impact on our hospitals, along with perhaps aged care facilities. And so we've been thinking very carefully about how we better equip aged care facilities and hospitals to deal with the enormous pressures around infection control and just simply demand on the systems that would come with another pandemic. One of the big successes, I think, of the government response during the last pandemic was the GP respiratory clinics program. We continue to have a panel of about 100 services that would be able to be stood up very quickly, again, to try and take that pressure off hospitals where people are able to be dealt with and supported for a respiratory illness in a primary care setting rather than having to go to an acute hospital. But we're working through this with state governments to make sure that there is that capacity and we learn the lessons of the last pandemic.
Could you perhaps reflect a bit on the specific importance of therapeutics and what role they play and the associated challenges with, rolling those out?
Yeah. Well, we've talked a bit about, the pressure on hospitals and aged care facilities. Vaccination obviously was a critical way of relieving that pressure on the community broadly, but importantly also those parts of the system. But we know therapeutics and treatments are going to do that as well. As soon as we can get treatments in place, the sooner obviously people are going to be better off, but also we're going to relieve that inordinate pressure on our hospital and aged care systems. I've seen that and I still see it in aged care now. the ready availability of antiviral treatments for very old people in aged care facilities who are hit by COVID is still saving lives in very large numbers. So the sooner in the pandemic that we're able to not only get people vaccinated, but also give them access to antivirals or other treatments, we know from experience and just general understanding, the better that will be.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, just to build on that, I think a lot about, having spent my career in HIV, is a pandemic where we can't get a vaccine. And then we're really and that, that is something we all need to be thinking about. And a lot about the benefits of antivirals in an infection like HIV for both treatment and prevention. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as the leading the fantastic prevention task force that you set up in Australia, and the role antivirals have played in the HIV response? It's interesting. I think many people don't kind of know that may not think about the reality of a pandemic like we've had with HIV, where there is no vaccine.
Well, that's right, no vaccine. And there was a debate I was watching in the early part of the COVID pandemic, given there hadn't been a vaccine for a novel coronavirus ever established, that there might not be one, and we should put all our effort into treatments and therapeutics. I mean, luckily we got one and we're able to do both. But, we've seen through the HIV epidemic of more than 40 years now, just what an amazing contribution therapeutics have made. That antiviral treatment that has really sort of got us to a position of preventing transmission as well as preventing death. I've also seen it in hepatitis C in my time.
Yeah.
And when I was last in this portfolio, we were modelling 12 to 15 years ago a devastating situation where maybe 250, 280,000 people with hepatitis C who only had access to interferon back then, which was really difficult to tolerate. A lot of people went off it before it had an impact. I come back to the portfolio 10 years later and we've got a highly effective, essentially virus-clearing treatment on the PBS that frankly was only in the imagination 10 or 12 years ago. So making sure we spread the effort, yes, vaccine development, if we can do that, obviously that's the holy grail, but never underestimating the power that good therapeutics can have on these epidemics. And we've got, not just through COVID, we've got through HIV, I think I'm right to say through hepatitis C too, some really stark examples right in front of us.
Right. Now, switching from the sort of acute response, which is so important to be thinking about and planning for now, to the research that underpins some of our activities in preparing for and responding to a pandemic. The National Health and Medical Research Strategy for Australia is set to be released soon, aiming to strengthen Australia's world-leading medical research capabilities. How do you think this strategy will help pave the way for the next big medical breakthrough?
Well, one of the great, I think, advances in our health and medical research ecosystem over the last 15 years or so has been the introduction of the MRFF, the Medical Research Future Fund. I mean, that came from a review of the system that I initiated 15 years or so ago, led by Simon McKeon. And what it tried to do was introduce a funding stream that would be focused on priority-driven research rather than investigator-initiated research, which, as you know, has been the bread and butter of the NHMRC's work for 75 or 80 years. And I think the benefit of that was really demonstrated through COVID, where the MRFF was able very quickly to shift into funding research programs that you'd understand far better than anyone, Sharon, into vaccines and diagnostics and a whole range of other areas that were so critically important in an immediate sense to the pandemic response. What I think we've seen, though, with the development of the MRFF and the traditional NHMRC system is a level of duplication, perhaps a lack of the synergies we'd like to see and the administrative streamlining of those two systems, while retaining what I think is important, which is, on the one hand, a priority-driven stream of funding research that is able to reflect the priorities that government and community think we have from time to time, with a great tradition of the MREA that is investigator-initiated. I mean, it really was such a bold ambition that Australia had in the 1930s when it set up the NHMRC to become a world leader in an area, if you remember the time in the none of us remember it, but, you go back to that time, the idea that Australia would punch above its weight was a pretty radical one in the 1930s. And we have, particularly in immunology and virology and infectious diseases. And so making sure that what we now have, which is about $1.5 billion going into research every year, when I last had responsibility for this area 12 or 15 years ago, it was way less than half of that amount. Making sure that we're getting the best bang for buck from that is generally important, I think, but also important in terms of pandemic preparedness. I know the NHMRC is holding a round table over the next few months about pandemic preparedness. I'm really looking forward to hearing the outcome of that as well.
Another major milestone coming up is the official opening of the Australian Centre for Disease Control next year. What are your hopes and ambitions for the centre? And how do you see research playing a role in supporting the centre's work, especially when it comes to future pandemics?
This is a really critical reform. Obviously, it was a promise of our party going into the 2022 election. And as your listeners or viewers would know, we're really the only OECD country that doesn't have something like this. And I think the COVID inquiry pointed to that as a missing part of the jigsaw puzzle. Not the only one, but a missing part of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of our response to the last pandemic. What I think we want from it is a single authoritative source of advice in this area for initially for infectious diseases. I think over time we would like to see it move into non-communicable diseases as well, but its initial work will be focused on infectious diseases, and we frankly lack that, and I think that is important in and of itself in terms of making sure that the health system's able to respond in the most effective way possible. But it also goes to that question of trust we talked about earlier. Having a single independent authoritative source of advice is not just important for you and me as the health minister and the hundreds of thousands of doctors and nurses and health professionals trying to support the community through this pandemic, but for the broader community to have confidence that governments are making decisions that reflects the best available advice, I think was right at the heart of the challenge we now have around community trust. The other question, though, I think that Robin Cruck and her panel came to was transparency. And I think that, making sure that the CDC operates in a way that is transparent and the community feels that they have a good line of sight on will be critically important as well. I've been really keen to make sure that we bring states and territories along with us. This won't be of any use really whatsoever if it's only a Commonwealth effort, and they've been terrific in supporting this. I want to make sure that one of its early pieces of work is to set up a really humming data and disease surveillance system, because frankly, we don't have that. We know that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was still a lot of paper being used, fax machines being used. Even when I came to the job in 2022-23, I found it pretty much impossible to get good data on who was dying of COVID, for example. What was their vaccination status? What was their indigeneity? None of that was covered by even the NDSS. So this will be a really critical reform for Australia, and I think significantly lift our ability to respond to the next pandemic. Interestingly, I'd say just finally, I've been really taken by the level of interest from my colleagues around the world in us doing this. I mean, they see this as an important part of the global network of these centres, I guess, making sure that we've got global coverage, and we're going to be very important in our part of the world through this CDC, being able not only to provide Australia and our immediate neighbours with good advice about what's happening, but be able to work with other CDCs. You were obviously doing that, and Doherty was obviously doing it with your colleagues in other countries, but we didn't quite have that same comprehensive single source of data from Australia that a CDC would deliver us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just that single point of focus that's equivalent to other agencies around the world will make a huge difference. Thanks so much, Minister, for giving us so much of your time and insights into this really important area that we're all struggling to be better prepared for. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just thanks for the work obviously you did and your institute did through those years. It is a painful, human process to go back and reflect on what was such a traumatic period for people. It's a very human instinct not to look back at a period that was so tough for everyone, so traumatic for many, many people, a lot of death, a lot of dislocation and loss. But it is important that we look back. And that's why I think, looking at this COVID inquiry report, reflecting on the experience of the people you worked with, Sharon, and making sure that we're better prepared for next time is difficult, it's painful, but it's critically important.
Great. Thank you so much.
Here in Victoria, the Honourable Danny Pearson serves as the State Minister for Medical Research, but he also holds the portfolios for economic growth, jobs and finance. That puts him right at the intersection of medical research and economic development, especially in Victoria's fast-growing biotechnology sector. In 2024 alone, biotech and medical devices contributed $5.4 billion to the state's economy. So down here, medical breakthroughs aren't just life-saving, they're also big business. How you doing, Minister?
Yeah, call me Danny.
Danny? Oh, easy. I'm Matt. So ready to go?
Yep.
Excellent. Joined today by Minister Danny Pearson. Danny, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. The Victorian Government has invested over $1 billion in health technology over the last 10 years. That's a big bet on medical breakthroughs.
Well, when you've got the talent that we've got here, it's a very safe bet. I'm in awe of the quality of the research institutions, but also the calibre of the individuals involved. It's a really safe bet, and something I'm really proud that we've been able to do as a government. That we've invested over $1 billion over this last decade. It's just it's something I'm incredibly proud of.
It's phenomenal, and it's such a, intricate part of the Victorian and Melbourne tapestry, our involvement with cutting-edge medical research, as you said, over the last 10 years. What would you say are kind of the key wins the state's notched up over the last decade when it comes to medical research?
From my perspective, I think looking at the investment that we've made, whether it's in terms of the $400 million that has been allocated to the Australian Institute for Infectious Diseases, the money that we've provided for OAS in the recent budget, which plays a really critical role in supporting research institutions for those expenses that would be funded by a Commonwealth grant. That's been really important. I think that the investments we're making in relation to tackling insidious diseases like children's cancer is something that I'm incredibly proud of. Because again, there's a real opportunity for us to try to tackle this head on and deal with it. I think in terms of as a precinct or as a state, we've done a lot in terms of finding those the ability to try and find targeted therapies to deal with some pretty awful diseases. I know we are doing some fantastic work at the moment in relation to tackling issues like malaria. I think that when you look at the work that's been done today in relation to the identification of a rotavirus and developing a vaccine to tackle that directly has also played a really important role. And I think that we are in a really strong position now because of these investments to be the only city in the world that's got Moderna as well as BioMedical and to be in a really strong position to confront whatever may come our way over the next 100 years.
Yeah, I think one of the really incredible parts of what we have in terms of medical capabilities is the ability to go from cutting edge research all the way through that pipeline to manufacturing at scale. And that's something that's quite unique and special to us here in Melbourne.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if you look at Moderna, you look at the potential that Moderna holds. The fact that it can, when it's fully operational, will have the capacity to produce 100 million vaccine doses per year. I mean, that's going to make a profound difference when it comes to soft-on capability. It's also going to play a really important role for Australia to play a leadership role in the Indo-Pacific region. So we really need to make sure that we've got the capacity to be able to respond to these challenges and having just a really strong series of precincts that we've got here in Melbourne puts us in an incredibly strong position.
And I think that's a really good point about we're creating these doses and these vaccinations and the capability we have to create them, not just for us in Australia, but being able to offer that additional support to low and middle income countries, in particular the Pacific, which we're closely have close ties with.
We are a really strong middle power in the region. We've got an opportunity to play a really strong leadership role in relation to providing those targeted interventions to provide really good, efficient and effective healthcare options throughout the region. And we can do that because we've got a really strong precinct.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we'll really be able to leverage is now having that manufacturing capability of mRNA vaccinations, which obviously was something we didn't have during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a huge upside. And again, as you said, it cements Melbourne's position as a global leader in this space, both vaccinations but medical research broadly. With the Cumming Global Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics, what is it that I guess excites you most about the work that's happening here?
Well, I mean, I think the fact that we've been able to attract such a significant philanthropic contribution from Jeffrey Cumming, like it's an extraordinary amount of money that has been provided. I look at these sorts of investments and I think about the future. And I think the fact that, in many respects, we are standing on the shoulder of giants in the sense that somebody had the foresight and the vision to put CSL here in Melbourne. Someone had the foresight and vision to have WeHi established early last century. I think when you look at that significant donation, it really builds on our strengths. And you look to the future and you think that we are making these sorts of investments. And ultimately, when I'm no longer the Minister for Economic Growth and Jobs, when I'm no longer the member for Essendon, you can look back on your time and you think, well, I left the place better than I found it. And these sorts of investments are going to play a really important role in terms of improving health outcomes, not just for Victorians and Australians, but for people throughout the Indo-Pacific region and globally.
Yeah, and it's something that obviously is uniquely positioned for government and philanthropic investment. I guess from a private side, you're asking people to invest potentially in things that might not happen with the pandemic, which is not necessarily true. We kind of know it's a when rather than an if. So, yeah, I mean, this is something that obviously government and philanthropic investment is uniquely positioned to be the significant contributor to these sort of research endeavours.
Yeah, look, I think there's lessons and learnings that can be garnered. And I think that, again, Sharon Law was recently in the paper talking about the work that she did during the pandemic in relation to mRNA and the application for that for tackling the HIV virus. I think that when you've got incredibly intelligent people who are completely dedicated and focused and devoted to, it's not a job, it's a calling, it's a vocation. They've got the capacity to do some incredible things. And I think that sort of research has got enormous application to find other opportunities, other avenues where it can be applied. Recently, I was really pleased to join the Premier at the annual or the 30th Premier's Awards into Medical Research and listen to the young researchers, the work that they were doing, what motivated them, getting a sense in terms of where they think this research is going to go. Like, it's just extraordinary. We've built up this great cluster of incredibly passionate and intelligent people working in globally renowned research institutions. And it's intoxicating to think where this can take us. It really is, because these people are just so passionate and committed, and they're doing amazing things. And again, I'm so fortunate, so incredibly fortunate to visit these institutes and to meet these people, because they're just they're so inspiring.
It's absolutely amazing speaking to them, because they are so excitedly passionate about what they're doing, and as you said, tremendously intelligent. And it's the perfect combination to see the research excellence take place when you've got someone who's passionate and loves what they do and is tremendously intelligent as well. What's the sort of impact you see in terms of the Melbourne economy with this sort of investment into something as critical as the Cumming Global Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics?
Well, I think what it does, it sends a signal that as a government, we are prioritising this as a key area of focus and interest. I think it's saying to researchers at a global level that we've got something very special here and something that you might want to consider. Without getting too political, it is concerning to see what is happening in the United States at the moment. I think that we've always cherished academic freedoms, and I think that's something for a progressive, modern, pluralistic, respectful society that is a hallmark. That is what you do, and I think that these sorts of investments, I think we're sending a very clear signal to the global market, to researchers across the globe, that we're doing something different here in Melbourne. We're doing something very special here in Melbourne. The government is backing up the efforts of researchers with a significant investment. And if you're looking for a change of scene, well, we'd love you to think about coming to Melbourne. And I think that it really plays to that sense of clustering. If you're a medical researcher of some renown, operating in the States or indeed any other jurisdiction, you can come to Melbourne and you're going to be respected, you're going to be welcomed, you're going to have a large ecosystem of like-minded individuals, and there's capacity to do great work here, work with meaning, work with purpose, work that can potentially change the course of history, change health outcomes on a global level. I mean, imagine if we find a cure for some of these terrible diseases like malaria. Imagine if you're a researcher and you were involved with that. Imagine if we find a cure for HIV/AIDS. These things that are they're not something to be dreamt of here in Melbourne. They're within our reach. They're within our grasp. You could literally, Matt, you and I could sort of down tools now, and we could walk half an hour to some of the best research institutions, and you'll be seeing people who are doing this right now. That's how close it is physically, and how close it is to becoming a reality right here in Melbourne.
Yeah, that's really at the coalface of this cutting edge, trailblazing research. And it's to your point, it's kind of not in the realm of science fiction anymore. This is science. This is happening, and I think you're right that some of the research that's already taking place is going to get to a place of things such as curing HIV or finding therapeutics that can be rapidly developed for pandemic response. So it's enormously exciting area of research, and it's so exciting that Melbourne is at the forefront of it.
For the medical researchers out there, the students, the scientists, the support staff, I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you for what you do, because I really value what you do. I've got enormous regard and appreciation and respect for the work that you do. And it's really valued. And for me, I'm excited when I think about the future. I look to the future with a degree of hope and confidence and optimism. That we are going to be able to find cures for these awful diseases. I was really pleased to be out with FlightAir recently at the Florey, and to see firsthand the kind of work that's being done, the research that's being done, the important work that's being done. You can't help but feel that within a matter of years, we might not have a cure for MND, but you know what? It might be a bit like what the AIDS virus was in the 1990s, where you finally have a way in which you can live with the virus rather than die from the virus. You might die with the virus, but you won't die as a result of the virus. And I think that for all those researchers out there, I just love meeting you. I love hearing about your work. I love your passion. I love your excitement and your enthusiasm. And I love what you do, because I know how profound this work will change our city and our state and the globe. I'm working my way around the various institutes. I haven't got to everyone yet, but I'm working my way around, and it's incredibly inspiring.
Fantastic. Great message to all the researchers and obviously all the aspiring scientists that will be carrying out this cutting-edge research in the future. Minister, Danny, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you again for being part of the Victorian Government's commitment to medical research here in Melbourne.
Thanks so very much for having me. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
So we've heard from the politicians, but what about the people at the coalface? Let me introduce you to Professor Laura Mackay. Laboratory Head and Immunology Team Leader at the Doherty Institute. We're here in the middle of the labs on a busy Monday morning, and hopefully we're not in the way here.
No, it's great to have you here. So I work here at the Doherty. I'm an immunologist, and the Cumming Global Centre is a really important part of what we do here. I serve on the internal advisory group of the Cumming Global Centre.
So, having worked in research a little bit, I've seen my own take on a research environment and what makes a good one. I'm interested in terms of your research environment. What do you think makes a good and effective and productive research environment? And where do you find, I guess, inspiration for your next big ideas? How do you come up with the next thing you really want to dig into and better understand and develop?
At Doherty, we're centred in the Parkville precinct. It's a hugely collaborative space. We have all sorts of institutes right by us. And here, as you can see in our labs at Doherty, they're all really free-flowing. We collaborate widely across the floor, up and down the building with virologists, computational scientists. And so it's a really collaborative space. And the Cummings Global Centre, again, is really bringing people together, which is so important to make, the best and most exciting research environment. With regards to where we get our sort of new ideas, in general, we let the data show us the way. So we have hypotheses, data will tell us we're wrong or we're right. We follow curiosity, and it's exciting. Students will have their own hypotheses, I will have mine. We dream about them. You live and breathe the science. It's the never-ending jigsaw puzzle, and everybody here really lives and breathes what they do, and you're always thinking about it and what's next and working out how you can unpack things and do them better.
What is the government's role in this sort of research?
The government really gives essential support for our research. Research wouldn't be possible without governmental support. And research, it doesn't happen overnight. The discoveries don't happen overnight. And so really giving that sustained research funding through to researchers so we can make the discoveries, be ready for the next pandemic, is really important in everything in what we do here.
And in terms of that sort of research excellence, funding critically important, is there another piece they, I guess, need to be involved with vaccination rollouts or with an educational piece or things of that nature as well?
I think everybody's got a role to play in the educational piece. Like yourself, thank you so much for, shining a light on what we do here. Certainly putting our research out there to the public, I think that's, everybody's job, including the government, to really translate what happens in research laboratories and how we get to, the next therapeutic that might protect against the next pandemic.
So what sort of research happens here at the Doherty Institute, and how does that relate to the Cumming Global Centre?
So there are all sorts of immunologists in the building studying how our immune system protects against infection, virologists, computational scientists, drug discoverers, and we're all really together focusing on new ways to tackle infectious diseases that have the potential to cause future pandemics.
And I'm going to ask a personal one. What was your sort of academic journey to where you are now? What was your, I guess, high school, what really did you really enjoy subject-wise, and then from a bachelor degree through to where you find yourself now, what was your academic journey?
Non-scientific, for sure.
Okay.
I always wanted to be an artist. I didn't really understand what a scientist was or what scientists did. I didn't have that exposure growing up. And certainly studying science didn't excite me either because it was a whole lot of textbooks. I did a degree in biology, largely to be a rebel against my artist family. And at the same time, I got infected with Epstein-Barr virus, which is a common virus that people get at university, which causes glandular fever. And then I went down this whole sort of research rabbit hole of how viruses can make you feel so sick and what's going on. I ended up doing my PhD on Epstein-Barr virus research, so I went all the way.
Yep.
And then from there, I moved to Melbourne, following my PhD in the UK, where I started to work on T cells. T cells, in my kind of mind, are the big business to fight against different infections. And so I wanted to understand how we could make T cell-based vaccines and how we could empower T cells to go off and kill all the viruses within us.
Fabulous. I love that because I meet so many people who have an interest in science but maybe haven't started in a place of science from high school. Hearing stories about the variety of pathways people can travel to get to a place of scientific research, I think is really great. So I love that story. And can we have a close look?
I'd love to show you around. Follow me.
Fabulous.
first I might take you inside our tissue culture area.
Excellent.
So here you can see researchers working inside sterile hoods. This is why they might be growing animal or human cells. And here we can look directly how viruses might infect these cells and genetically modify them to either hopefully do better, hopefully to give the immune system the chance to win the race.
Right. So might be a silly question. How do you go about modifying these viruses?
Great question. I'll take you to the molecular biology area where we do a lot of CRISPR genetic engineering.
Okay.
This has really changed our research
Yes.
in the past decade. When I was on the bench, things took a really long time. Now we can genetically modify DNA very, very quickly.
So CRISPR, that's sort of been a fairly big buzzword in biological sciences
Yes.
for a couple of decades. And now it's kind of coming to fruition. And
Now it's common practice. So
Right.
we CRISPR engineer cells all the time to make genetic mutations and program T cells to do better or viruses to do worse.
this might be getting you on the spot. What does CRISPR stand for?
Oh Christ, I've
Have I
been
caught
asked
you out
that.
here?
Yes, I've been asked that before. And it's the palindromic repeats, sequence repeats.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
And can you give, again, it's probably hard because it's quite complex what it's doing, but can you give a sort of, explain like I'm five kind of idea of how it works?
Yeah, so it precisely cuts DNA exactly at a specific mutation.
Right.
And so then
So it cuts it like with lasers? Is that how it's kind of?
no,
it's-
it cuts the DNA using enzymes.
Right. Okay.
So it will cut the DNA using enzymes that will create a very specific break, and you can do that in human or you can do that in animal cells.
That's so cool.
Are you doing a CRISPR experiment, Lewis? Yes. What does CRISPR stand for? So our group here will be
Hello.
isolating immune cells, looking at their function. We do a lot of flow cytometry in the
What was
lab.
that, sorry?
Flow cytometry.
Yes.
Marina, can you explain?
Here we go.
So basically, we isolate T cells from the tissues through some digestions and a long protocol, basically, and then we label them with some antibodies that are going to be giving off a bit of a color or a fluorophore towards particular markers of interest. For example, CD8, CD4, your typical T cell markers, and then we're able to run them in a flow cytometer machine where those colors will basically emit light when they're expressed on the cell that we've isolated.
Right. So this is I'm coming at this from a bit of a spectroscopy lens.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm familiar. Obviously, different molecules, different elements will have different kind of fingerprints in terms of what their absorption and emission spectroscopy. Is that the same kind of situation here? Similar kind of concept?
Yeah. So we label the cells that we've isolated from the tissues with antibodies that do have those fluorophores, and so if those markers are being expressed on the cell, they will emit that. That
unique fingerprint.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
And really what we're looking for here is its target discovery. So we're looking for molecules that can be harnessed to improve T cell function. And
Right.
excitingly, going off script, Marina's looking at specifically is different responses between males and females and the response of hormones like testosterone and
Right,
estrogen
okay.
on the effect of immune cell function.
So is there, again, probably, excuse a lot of my questions are probably going to be quite ignorant. Is there a significant difference in male and female immune responses?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Massive, okay.
Massive, yeah. So we know, like in the clinic, that females are more prone to getting autoimmune-like diseases. Males, for example, are more prone to getting a lot of different cancer types, actually.
Okay.
And so those are those two, immune responses to those two different kinds of conditions are very different. And so males having a sort of underreactive, let's say, immune system compared to the females that are very overreactive, and hence the autoimmune-like diseases being higher in females.
Right, okay.
And so it's just interesting because when you go to the clinic, males and females are generally treated in the same way for similar conditions across.
Whereas it's something that should be treated quite significantly different.
And
Yeah,
it's
okay.
the same with immune responses across age. So, you wouldn't treat a child the same way as you would treat
Right.
somebody who's, sort of in their kind of later years. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to understand how the immune system matures over time.
You mentioned there's obviously a huge involvement and integration of AI now into what you're doing. Do you see, in terms of there's such a big difference in immune response between males and females, obviously this sliding scale with age group, do you see it kind of a bespoke AI helping to
100%.
curate very personalised treatment?
Yes, and there's so many computational data sets generated all around the world, and this is why we have a lot of computational scientists integrated with immunologists now to really go through the big data sets.
Yep.
So immunology's really changed from just being people in the laboratory to pretty much 50-50 people working,
Yeah, right.
through, coding, computational programs with the big data, and then folks like Marina who are on the bench, at the coalface, isolating the T cells.
Yes, that's right.
I love that.
One last thing I might show you.
Yes, please.
Is Ali.
Yeah. Hi.
Can you show us the microscopes?
Or photon microscopy.
This is the real deal.
Okay, this is I'm very excited.
Will anyone be in here?
Just knock first.
These are our 2 photon microscopes. So the really exciting thing in here is we can visualize how viruses infect immune cells in real time. We can do live imaging, watching exactly how viruses can enter infected cells and exactly how the immune system can combat that.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your time and showing us around the lab. I'll let you get back to work.
Absolute pleasure. I'll show you out, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Don't worry, there's more scientists to come. In the next episode, we'll hear about the cutting-edge technology being used in these very labs.